For me, I think the one thing we have is organizational depth now that we haven't had in the past, especially with the strong second half from Castillo, Romano, Stevenson. Got a little taste of Tyler Malley and Jackson Stevens. I think in a dire scenario that's a situation that would work. We do have Finnegan and DeSclafani coming off of injury. Homer Bailey pitched the bulk of the second half for us, healthy. So I understand the question for sure. I think there's teams that will probably take a look at that. For me, I like a traditional five-man rotation, in particular with the addition of the extra off days this year. I think it's a lot harder once you train your players to be in a 6-day or 6-man rotation. If you ever want to peel that back, I think that becomes a bit more challenging. We're conditioning our guys in the system to pitch on every 5-day rotation, at least from A ball. And maybe I'm a traditionalist, but I'd like to see us stick with a 5-man rotation and hopefully only a 7-man bullpen, so we have some more bench strength.
All these names that have been mentioned for your rotation, Michael Lorenzen's been coming up now that he might get a chance. If he goes in that mix, then somebody's going to get squeezed out that might have had a good year last year, or one of your veterans.
Right, and the thing that you have to do in spring, we've learned this lesson the hard way, is that you have to be conditioning more than 5 guys. You may have 6 guys, or realistically 7 guys that are competing for your rotation if you're in a situation like ours. But because we've really had a hard time getting out of spring training healthy out of within our starting rotation, we have to have the depth. I think it's safe to say that Homer and DeSclafani are in the rotation. I really think that Brandon Finnegan is a guy that can help us in the rotation. Castillo and Romano pitched particularly well as starters, and I liked what we saw out of Stevenson and Malley as well. So I think that without question, with a guy like Lorenzen, we know where his heart is. His heart is having that opportunity to start. I think at this point in time in his career, it's a safe time to take a look at it. At this point in time, we don't know what type of bullpen pieces we might be able to add in the off season to maybe further stabilize that bullpen. But he does understand that what we're going to do is first and foremost is what's in the best interest of the ball club. And if it's Michael as a reliever, then he'll be in the bullpen. But I'd like to provide him with an opportunity to showcase his skills as a starter and at least accomplish that taking advantage of an opportunity to compete for a spot. Where he shakes out, I don't know.
So it sounds like in your mind, you really only have kind of the 5th spot in the rotation that's undecided at this point.
I would say so from my perspective. I don't have the only vote in the room on this, and we have to get through spring training whole. So we do have to create a depth to our starting options coming out of spring training. Homer, I believe, has gotten over his injury issues. I don't think that Finnegan is going to be a guy that I'm going to concern myself with him re-injuring the teres major, the injury that he had last year. And the question really is DeSclafani, because he's missed some time with the elbow, and we think we got him over the hump. He finished the year in instructionally healthy, but proof's going to be in the pudding with that, and we have to have that fallback, and you also have to have the fallback if someone shows up and their arm's not feeling great at the beginning and may have to start the season on the DL. So the depth is going to be very important. As of today, I would say I've got 4 guys in mind that I'm really comfortable with in the rotation that for me would be considered locks.
Can you say who those 4 are?
Well, I think DeSclafani, Bailey, Finnegan, and Castillo. For me, it doesn't mean they're on the team or that they're in the rotation. I think you could throw Romano in there as a guy that is. One thing we do have to do with the guys that are competing for spots is you do have to place them in certain positions. You can't say that every spring training you come back and you disregard the previous year's results and say, hey, everyone gets to start from square one together. Some guys outpitched others. Romano outpitched some other kids in the system, as did Castillo, as did Malley in a shorter look. as did Rob Stevenson. You know, and that you have to give those guys credit for pitching well at the big league level compared to other prospects in our system that we all really like, but didn't pitch as well in their opportunity.
How much of those guys that are in play for that final spot, if they don't get that spot, or how much of them are guys you put in AAA as starters, or how much would you keep in your bullpen? Just
well, first thing is I think we want to define the pitchers that we really see long-term as starting pitchers and guys that we feel will benefit from starting in AAA and continuing to add some polish to their repertoire, as opposed to then simply segueing them into the bullpen in long relief. I think that every guy's a unique case. You know, last year we had Cody Reed and Rob Stevenson began the season in our bullpen. Both went back to AAA to start, and both came back to the big leagues. And Rob really did a nice job in his starting opportunities after he was sent down. I would say that there are at least two guys in the mix that have been starters that will get an opportunity to compete as relievers. Not going to mention them right now because I'd rather talk with them about it before I make any announcements and make sure that Dick and our front office have their support in that. But I think we have at least two guys that have been primarily starters in our system that will compete for bullpen spots in spring training, and bullpen spots only.
Did you talk about starters and rotation?
Good to see you, Tyler.
What did you touch sort of in general on six-man rotations? And if you had gotten Tony, obviously there's great stories about his pitch. Would you have considered that or gone to that?
Well, we would, and the one thing that I don't know if anyone had that opportunity. Maybe the 7 teams that had a chance to kind of to actually meet face to face with Ohtani had the opportunity to discuss what he wanted to do. You know, he so badly wanted to come and compete in the U.S. Are his intentions to compete in a 5-man rotation and really want to come over and transition completely? Would his expectations be to pitch every 6th day or once a week? We divided it up, and we looked at like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, once a week scenario, and felt that with the pitchers we have coming off injury and the youth in our system and the desire to maybe perhaps limit innings for some of our young pitching prospects, that it would work in our particular scenario. To me, it's not ideal, because it's going to affect everybody's ability to pitch on turn or in a more traditional setting. But we were willing to take that shot because of this current scenario. I would think long-term the desire would be to get Ohtani eventually to that position where he was pitching every 5th day, so not everyone in your rotation is affected. You technically have to have a 6-man or 7-man rotation in order to make it work with when you have a guy that's pitching once a week. So it affects everybody in the rotation. So we're willing to do that, I think, for the first year, and then take a look going into year 2 on if we could find ways to perhaps bring that back into more of a traditional 5-man.
Do you still believe in that kind of setup? It's fewer and fewer guys throwing 200 innings now. It just seems like now teams are just spread around the innings.
And it mentioned earlier, I may be a traditionalist. The thing that I'm seeing is I'm not seeing a decrease in arm injuries because we're decreasing the numbers of innings and pitches thrown. I'm seeing that we decrease the numbers of innings, pitches thrown per season. Pitchers that come up on the 40-man roster, they come up in September and throw a limited number of innings, or you have somebody like we had Luis Castillo throwing the ball extremely well for us, and we stopped his season in September because he had reached his innings maximum. My feeling is I'd like to condition these kids to be able to throw more innings. And so I'm simply because history proves that it can be done, number one, and number two, all these decreases in numbers or a decreased workload hasn't established or decreased the number of arm injuries that we're seeing in our system. I can tell you that. We have a complex full of kids, as do most teams, that are coming off some sort of an injury, a surgery, and spending an entire season out in Goodyear doing rehab. And these are kids that are coming in with a very particular, very modest workload that are still getting injured. And going to a 6-man rotation, cutting guys down to 160 or 175 innings a year, I don't think that's going to be the answer to the arm epidemic that we're facing right now.
Because, Dick has always talked about the young youth of your roster, 2 guys over 30, et cetera. How much is that hurt you guys in the sense that you have a lot of young guys on your team, but at the same time, you gave a lot of exposure to those guys last year. And how much do you think that's going to help you going into this year to actually take the next step?
Well, I think this is the first year where we saw that the painful commitment that you make to youth finally. We finally saw that kind of somewhat turn the corner in the way that our starting pitching in particular performed the last third of the season, hitting on those same guys, hitting on Romano, Castillo, Stevenson, Malley, Jackson Stevens. We saw what we wanted to see. We've been down this road so many times now in the last 2 or 3 years, introducing young pitchers to the big leagues, having a primarily rookie rotation, underperforming, losing games. 2017 was the first season in my time as the manager that I know where our young pitching took a step that built the confidence that we can feel coming out of camp. I feel confident that if we came out there and you had any of those guys, if you had Castillo, Romano, Stevenson, Malley, Stevens, that group of guys somewhere in your rotation, that I would be confident that we could go out there and compete with that group and not sign off for another 95-loss type of a season. And that's what you have to get out of that. I mean, it's painful to ask anybody to go through seasons like that without finding some sort of silver lining at the end and optimism for the following season. And I think we finally got to that point. When you're in Cincinnati, I mean, we got to hit it right. Our window is, we've got young position players, but some of those young players, I mean, now we've got Duvall's got he's got 2 full seasons in. Suarez is now 3+. So he's arbitration eligible. Schebler's got a couple of years in. Peraza's got a couple of years in. So you get to that point where all of a sudden, we need this thing to hit because pretty soon these are going to be guys that are in their 5th or 6th season, and we have to make the tough decisions again like we've had to make on who we can extend and who we have to look to move. So in Cincinnati, we got to hit it right. I'd like to think that next season is going to be the improvement that we've been waiting to see in this group. But not only do we have to see improvement, pretty soon we've got to start to see our window, our playoff window open for us, and we've got to jump through it.
How much do you expect, and how do you expect to use Devin?
Well, first of all, the time that he's missed has been important time because it's, there's just no way, especially in that position, to stay on top of your game when you've missed the bulk of the last 3 seasons to the DL. So first thing I would like to see and really need to see is him continue to improve and get back to, he was really becoming, I thought, one of the better upper echelon defensive players in 2014 when he was our regular catcher. But we've got to keep him healthy, and he'll be a productive bench bat. He'll be a productive guy that comes in when I spell Tucker. Tucker's going to get the lion's share of the playing time now, and he's earned that. But I'd like to think that Devin can help us in any number of ways. First of all, probably catching at least a couple of times a week, as well as being able to help us off the bench. But I don't see him as a multi-positional guy myself.
How tricky is it to use him pinch hitting wise? Just, that's kind of getting ready for your safety net there if something does happen to you.
It's a lot easier later in the game than it is early in the game. Again, if you have a fallback type of a player that has some catching experience, the thing that we worry about is you realize that very few teams have, if you don't have a definitive third catcher, whoever that player is, it's your emergency catcher, probably hasn't caught much professionally. And you're lucky if they have. And so if something happens and you pinch hit with your guy in the 4th inning, if something happens, I mean, you're going with a guy that is going to have to handle velocity and movement for 4 or 5 or 6 innings in a game. And that poses another safety concern for me with good conscience putting somebody that's not really a catcher behind the plate in a big league game. So that's the reason why I think you see the lack of frequency of that second catcher hitting early in the game if you don't really have a legitimate third option. So the thing about Devin, though, is I think Devin can take, when he's not starting, can take some of those premium late game at bats against velocity and experience pitching, and we can feel that we have a competitive opportunity to have a productive at bat.
Got some former catchers in Kevin Shackelford and Shed Long.
Well done. Yeah. Now Shed Long is a guy, if you have Shed Long on the team, is that guy where you could go. got into big trouble, at least you've had a guy that caught professionally and caught through school and caught professionally. But I don't think there's that many of those guys out there. Shackelford's a nice little third or fourth option, though. Thanks for pointing that out.
You wouldn't carry three again. I mean, I know last year with Stuart Turner was a Rule 5 situation, but you're not looking at three catchers on the roster.
I'm not. I think that, especially in particular with Stewart, Stewart needs to be playing. So even if something happened to Devin or to Tucker, it would be a real tough ask for me after a year of not playing much to ask Stewart to come up and be the number 2 guy and catch maybe once a week, twice a week tops. I don't, from a development standpoint, I don't think that's the answer. So yeah, I don't see that. I don't see that happening. Carrying the Tigers.
Assuming that both Jesse Winker and Billy Hamilton are on the team next year, how do you see the leadoff spot playing out?
It's a great question. It'll be interesting. I think that it's, first of all, Jesse's always been an on-base guy. Jose Peraza was an on-base guy, much better on-base percentage in the second half of this last season. His walks went up. He was better with strikes on command. I think, and he's 23 years old. This kid, I think, is going to be a stud. So I think he's another candidate to hit towards the top of the lineup. Billy's got to start to get on base and impact the offense at a higher rate. I think that he's been in the league for 4 years. He has tremendous physical ability, but it's got to start to pay the dividends where we see the consistency. We saw a really good first half in 2014. We saw a terrific second half in 2016 before he got hurt, and we had periods of time in 2017 where he would have these nice stretches. But there has to be, in that role, when you're going to lead the team in at-bats or plate appearances, you have to have that ability to affect the offense at a high rate in order to justify getting those at-bats. So certainly looking at Billy and seeing him be productive is going to be the essential part to him hitting leadoff for us.
If he's not leadoff, is ninth the best spot for him, just so he's not hitting it from the pitcher?
Well, it could be, because the thing is that when he's on base, you want to green light him to run, and with the pitcher hitting behind him with 2 outs, you hate if there's that opportunity to not be able to take the opportunity to run, or if he does run and does happen to get thrown out as you're leading off with your pitcher the next inning. So, that's where if I haven't hit him first, I've hit him ninth. But I certainly want him to compete and have a great spring and be a guy that could be a consideration to hit leadoff. But he does need to show signs of improving that on-base percentage.
Bryan, the pitching trends we've seen lately, 2 big ones are the easy for me to say proliferation of curveballs, and of course the high four-seamers. Can you predict whether this is a long-standing trend, or adjustments have to be made because of hitters reacting to those?
Oh, I think we've adjusted to everything, right? It was a split finger. We adjusted to split finger. We adjusted to pitchers when they didn't have to come set. Come set when they're holding runners. We've had to contend with the change in strike zone, through the years, changing with the shifts, the defensive shifts. So the game will counterpunch. What's going to happen now is that hitters are going to start to define the top of the strike zone a little bit better. I think, like anything, the more you see of those early count breaking balls in that series, knowing that you're going to get 2 breaking balls per at bat, some of the more confident hitters, I think, will be able to go up there and sit on an off-speed pitch and effectively find a way to compete against that higher percentage of breaking balls. So I think the game just plays out that way. It's something that's been effective right now. Baseball will find a way to combat it, counter-punch, and then we'll see other adjustments made.
Do you think that will then change the power at all? The guys loft swing, and also hitting the high fastball out. Do you think that'll take away power once that adjustment happens?
I don't know if I can say that or not. The game is changing from the youth. From the youth organizations up into professional baseball, and we play a lot of showcase baseball, which we want to see velocity and power, and people are getting paid to hit homers. There's a lot of money made hitting homers and driving in runs with the home run. The strikeout as frowned upon as it once was. I think that's going to reverse. I think you're going to look to find guys that put the ball in play with more frequency, guys that have a higher on-base percentage and be willing to sacrifice some power in order to do that. It's hard for me to say. It's hard to say anymore with the fact that so many big power arms are getting to the big leagues without really knowing how to pitch. I think until the pitching improves, until we have more pitching savvy, that you're going to see a trend in offense, as we've seen in the last 2 years. It was only a couple of years ago we were talking about the downturn in offense and the fact that games were slower because of the strikeouts and the lack of run production, and outs weren't being made quickly, hits weren't being accumulated quickly. And I think that now that we're seeing that we're finding more and more guys that throw hard, but they don't know how to pitch, and those guys are being exploited because hitters can hit velocity. That has been proven.
If you guys are rotating your outfielders, I guess there might be some days where if Duvall is sitting, guys could be pretty left-handed bat heavy, especially towards the front of the lineup. Is that a concern at all?
You know what I saw? I remember because we share the complex with Cleveland, and sometimes playing them, and when we played them in interleague play, we play them every year. Is that Tito could have a dominant left-handed hitting lineup, and they won consistently. I think it's the quality of the left-handed hitters that you have. If you feel like you're a platoon-based organization, I don't think we're there yet. But your lefties are going to have to hit. Schebler last year hit better against left-handed pitching than right, but you've got to be able to find that particular group that you have on any given day are going to be able to compete. I think Winker can hit left-handed pitching. What we've seen from Scooter is we've seen at times in his career where he's been, and it's so typical for left-handed hitters, at times they have the seasons where they're very effective against left-handed pitching and other years where they're not. Unless we buy into a strict platoon type situation, which we haven't got to at that point, I got to put my faith in our left-handed hitters' ability to hit left-handed pitching.
I guess you could always, on the days Duvall sits, maybe Devin catches, and it gives you more of a power option from the right side. Because besides him, kind of guys who really hit the power on the right side was pretty much just Gino at this point.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where we are. And when you look at our club. We could get into that situation where it could be very left-handed dominant based on which lineup I decide to run out there. But I do think that the one big nugget that we have here that's real positive is the fact that with the addition of Winker and making a commitment to making sure he gets playing time just like the other outfielders, you always have an impactful player on your bench. And you might say, well, what about Billy? And Billy's not a big, impactful offensive player, but he can steal a base, he can defend, he can find a way to influence a game like nobody else, in baseball. So that in and of itself, in the days where Billy, was getting a day off, he still can help our ball club late in the game.
You mentioned Peraza earlier. I forgot to ask. He was planning on going to Venezuela to get reps at shortstop, and he seemed like he didn't play very much, and he went home or whatever. Do you know why he's not playing?
Well, he had some problems with, initially they felt like it was his lower back, and I think that was a small problem, not terribly significant. He hasn't checked out beautifully at his physical at Reds Fest. I think a lot of it had to do with the conditions. It was really the conditions of, being able to eat properly and to be in an environment where, he was safe and being able to benefit from the experience of playing. And I don't think it went quite as well as he had hoped.